Okay, so this is based upon, or it is the presentation that was given here in Woodside a few weeks ago, and just going to use that the slides as a template to go over what was presented, and hopefully you'll get something from it. At the time, as you can see from this slide, there were several other people present, and of course there's only me doing this. Okay, right. As a quick introduction to snakes in this part of Australia, this slide shows you the snakes that are found throughout Australia, and what we're most interested in, if you scan down that slide, are the last ones in colour, the land snakes. 105 species are found in Australia, and these are the venomous land snakes. The ones that occur in the Mount Lofty ranges, southern blind snake as in the photograph on the top, carpet pythons on the eastern parts of the Mount Lofty ranges, heading down towards the River Murray, the smaller little whip snake found throughout the Mount Lofty ranges, no photo of that, and the last four, pygmy copperhead, red-belly black snake, eastern brown snake and tiger snake, are all medically important because they are venomous and large enough, and have in the past caused some medical issues with people. The pygmy copperhead is smaller than the others, and even though it is still technically venomous, there's no known significant problems with those. The red-belly black and eastern brown are the most common of the snakes of the Mount Lofty ranges. Tiger snakes are only found in the vicinity of the Onkaparinga River, roughly from Woodside through to about Verdun. I'm going to look at a couple of different parts of the presentation, and this one addresses the importance of protective clothing, as well as issues when people and snakes come together. Some scientific studies were done in the mid-90s in New South Wales, and they were quite extensive, 455 close encounters with red-belly black snakes and mostly brown snakes in the Riverina area of New South Wales. And the two scientists from the University of Sydney came up with 4 different areas as to what happens when snakes and humans come together. And the first one was what people can do and what they're wearing when they confront a snake. Some of it might be logical, and others are not so logical. If you approach a snake quite quickly, as you can see in the top photograph, then you're more likely to get a reaction than if you were to accidentally come upon one slowly and had a chance to get away from you. So the speed of approach as well as approach distance can have an impact on how the snake responds to a human. Also, if you accidentally, perhaps with your foot, touch a snake, then you may or may not get a reaction based upon its temperature at the time of the year, and some other factors. What might be surprising though is the 4th dot point there relating to the clothing you are wearing. Scientists found that if you're wearing a darker shade of clothing compared to something of a lighter shade, and it wasn't colour so much, it was the shade, so it could be dark brown, dark blue, black clothing, the snake is more likely to see you as you contrast in the environment, particularly against the skyline, and therefore more able to get away from you, which for most people that's an advantage. In regard to the snake itself, the scientists did find that there was a difference in their behaviour depending on whether it was a male or female snake, and also the size of it. And one part of that which does make sense is the smaller the snake, the more likely it is to try and get away, because it feels more vulnerable with a larger animal, human nearby. They found that it also related to what the snake was doing when the human came upon it and its temperature. And temperature affects everything about snakes. It's not just their movement, but also their digestion, their heart rate, breathing, and venom output. So quite a significant aspect of how snakes survive. The scientists found also, in regard to when they approached snakes in this study they were doing in New South Wales, that there are a number of other conditions that affected how the snake responded. And if it was cloudy, it had an effect on the contrast, so the snake was perhaps less able to see that a human was nearby. Also, of course, as you can see from the top photograph of a brown snake, the amount of vegetation impacted on how the snake would respond, and that related also to drought and just how much veg was there. And the fourth area they looked at related to the time of encounter, such as what type of year it was, the season. Snakes are most active in spring, not summer, and also they found that brown snakes were active at 2 times of the day, late morning and mid-afternoon. What we can't do, of course, here is what was done during the presentation, and that was using live snakes to show people how they respond. But what I can do with the photographs is show from previous encounters during training courses and so on that when a person stands quite still, you become effectively a part of the furniture of the location. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's out in the bush with a tree or it's around a property where there might be a fence post or something inanimate nearby. But surprisingly with snakes, when you stop moving, they just don't consider us a threat. And certainly it might still move in the vicinity of view, but if you're comfortable with what you're wearing, as you can see with the people in the photograph, they do not, as a matter of course, use that as an opportunity to try and bite you. One of the issues people have is the other photograph about trying not to panic, is that if you are standing still, then on very rare occasions the snake might want to stay in the close vicinity of you because you are the only available cover. And again, if you are comfortable with what you're wearing, and we'll address that more in a moment, then that in itself is not an issue. The only problem when a snake is close to a person, and when you're wearing the long trousers, as you can see in the photograph, is if it tries to come up on the inside, and that's a different issue entirely. From my experience of working with venomous snakes for 45 years, I've found that in the bottom photograph on the left that the snake is definitely more frightened of you. The issue I have with many people in the past is that what would normally be considered an aggressive act on the part of the snake is in fact where it's much more frightened of us, and they respond sometimes quite spectacularly, such as tiger snakes do. So some of the behavioural indicators of snakes you can see as you scan down those dot points, and one of the logical ones is if it bites, such as in the top photograph with that mulga snake chewing on a snake stick, but it could be other things that people are used to, such as the snake might hiss at you, it might spread its body out, such as in the lower photograph of that black snake. But what they're trying to do there, by increasing the size of the body of the snake, by spreading the ribs out and more opening the mouth to posture in that respect, is to try and frighten you. So it's defensive rather than aggressive. And if you understand this and either stand still and allow the snake to move away, or quietly move away before it gets to that point, then you both live another day. One of the comforting aspects of snakes around people is that certainly with our local snakes, eastern brown snakes and red-bellied blacks in the Mount Lofty Ranges and the Greater Adelaide area, is that you can quite easily protect yourself with suitable clothing and it doesn't have to be anything special. As long as you're wearing jeans or similar weight trousers and boots rather than shoes or sandals or thongs, of course, it is, as you can see from the top photograph with that brown snake biting on someone's leg, the fangs of brown snakes are very short, and you'll see that in a moment, and they are completely unable to bite through that protective clothing. So it does give you a very good protection against an accidental bite if you come upon a snake and perhaps stand on it accidentally and it responds. In regard to footwear, leather boots of any sort are also very good. The photograph there shows a 2-metre mulga snake, or sometimes called a king brown snake, trying to chew on the end of my toe. Not steel caps, they're just ordinary Rossi leather boots, and even though it sat there for several minutes, it was completely unable to its fangs to penetrate the leather. So they are very good in regard to protecting you. The measurements down the bottom are somewhat arbitrary though, just to give an idea of the thickness of the materials, the leather of the boots and the jeans. If you are still unconvinced that your trousers will protect you against the bite of local snakes, then gaiters, by adding another layer, make a significant difference. The photograph here is obviously of a 10-cent coin. On the right hand side is a fang from an African gaboon viper. Their fangs can be up to 50 millimeters long, the longest of any of the world's snakes, whereas the fang on the left of the coin is of an adult brown snake, and the text says that the fangs average 2.8 millimeters long. The maximum size of fangs of a brown snake are 4 millimeters. If you look at the one, or you might wish to pull a 10-cent coin out of your pocket at some stage and have a look yourself, you'll notice that the little stroke on the top of the one of the 10 cent is approximately the size of the brown snake fang. So that gives you an indication of just how small they are and why it's extremely unlikely that a brown snake is able to bite through trousers unless the material of the pants are tight against your skin, perhaps such as you might be kneeling down. So what you want to do with your protective clothing is to form a seal around your lower legs, as you can see in the photograph. The only issue might be with the larger snakes, such as that 2-metre eastern brown snake, that their reach is higher and a bite around the knee may be a little bit more of an issue, but the fangs are still amongst the smallest of all of Australia's large venomous snakes. This photograph is of the skull of a red-bellied black snake, and what I'm trying to do here is take this information a step further. You can see it's obviously laying on its upside down, but you can see the fangs of the red-bellied black. The other teeth are those on the roof of the mouth, and they are solid teeth, not connected to the venom apparatus. Australian venomous snakes' fangs are hollow, and venom from the venom gland passes through a venom duct below the eye, goes into the top of the fang, goes down the inside of the fang, and comes out through the fang, as you can see in this photograph, near but not entirely at the tip. And the advantage of this is that if the snake bites you through protective clothing on your trousers, you'll notice that the tip of the fang appears to have a blade-like edge, so it might actually touch your skin and cut it or scratch it, and this accounts for a number of the snake bites which are scratches rather than holes made by fangs. But the important thing here is that the outlet for the venom is not at the tip, and if it's biting you through protective clothing, the venom might be deposited in the clothing itself or on the surface of the skin rather than under the skin, and that's to your benefit. And this is one of the reasons why 3/4 to 80% of brown snake bites in Australia are what are called dry bites. No venom is injected under your skin. So just a quick look at what attracts snakes and why they hang around where you might live. Like all animals, they need the essentials of life, food, and the photograph is of an eastern blue-tongued lizard, which was actually bitten and partly swallowed by a brown snake. And when I caught it, the brown snake regurgitated the lizard, which survives, and it was released next day. They also need shelter, which protects them from predators such as the goanna in the photograph, or it might be dogs, cats, foxes, etc., even humans, and also from harsh elements such as too hot or too cold. And the bottom photograph is of a junkie property somewhere where that's the sort of situation that you don't want, because it would be very attractive for snakes and their food, of course, which might be mice or rats. So essentially what you're looking for to identify potentially a snake hazard is any shelter close to the ground. And it really doesn't matter what it is. It can be a pile of bricks in that photograph, it can be vegetation, it doesn't matter. In the photo with the two people in it, 3 brown snakes were caught in that vicinity. It was a horse property, although it was interstate, and you can see that where the people are standing, there's an abundance of shelter sites for snakes to be able to hide. Vegetation, of course, is another situation. So if you have too much veg, or after a lush summer such as the one we've had where there's been abnormally wet, and if it's growing along a fence or a building, then you really do need to do something about it, because you're just encouraging snakes to come in closer to where people or horses might be moving. Sometimes it's not entirely easy to see what might be a snake hazard, but this photograph, it should be quite simple. The old door laying on the ground there, once it's lifted, if it's been there long enough, there will be mice or rats underneath, and it's a shelter for snakes which are attracted to the food. They're sheltered from extremes of weather. So that in itself is a hazard, and if it's to be moved, then you need to do it in such a way as to not come into contact with the snake underneath. Once again, even a building here, it's up off the ground on bricks or pillars. Any material in the close vicinity, such as sheets of tin that are laying on the ground, they may very well provide habitat for snakes, even though the height of the building above the ground, snakes will get in under there to get away from weather or sun and movement, but they're unlikely to want to stay there. The issue with this photograph is the vegetation which is growing over the pavers and getting close to the swimming pool. That presents a hazard if snakes are attracted to want to shelter amongst the vegetation. Any rocks or vegetation which leads up to a house, or in the case of the photograph here, an aviary with birds in it, that can allow snakes to move amongst the rocks and getting closer to the house. If the vegetation, the plantings there, are allowed to just grow too much, once again, they'll give snakes the chance to move in close to where people are moving, or the children in the background. Any open rock areas such as this one, they look good, but be mindful of the attractant for snakes, that together with the shrubbery in the vicinity. It can be relatively easily solved by putting some material in amongst the rocks so snakes can't easily hide, and neither can mice. This was this photograph call out in the Adelaide Hills at a cafe, and a brown snake was seen in the vicinity of people having a cup of coffee on a Sunday morning. You can understand why the snake might be in that vicinity, because the vegetation is so thick. It needs to be thinned out, something done about it. And it can be simple, like the photograph here of the house with minimal vegetation near the path or the front door. Or the other alternative is, when there is vegetation, shrubbery like this, rather than rip it all out, as long as you trim the lower branches, as in the plant immediately in front, it does two things. It making it easy for people to see if there is a snake in the vicinity, and the snake's got nowhere to hide, so they don't stay there and they move on. And this principle is applied anywhere that snakes might occur. If you have a paddock where there is long grass or a crop, any sort of vegetation that snakes might move through, be mindful that, as you might think that the grass should be trimmed, but if you look at it from a snake's point of view, as in the photo here, close to the ground, it's quite thick, so you might get told by the CFS or the council that you need to thin it out or to slash it, as you see here. But effectively what you've done, if you don't either burn that or rake it or thin it out, is you've now provided a mat of cut grass through which snakes can move undisturbed. They won't be seen by aerial predators and they won't be seen by humans. So have you made your hazard better or worse? Potentially you've made it worse, unless you do something about thinning out the grass. Okay, so a couple of the risk factors in relation to snakes and horses. Anywhere that a snake can move, as you can read through this, where there might be horses. I won't go through each of these, but what do you need to do is to ensure that a horse can't be in close vicinity to where there might be a potential hazard, and that it could be anywhere around buildings, haystacks and so on. If you're working in those areas too, be mindful that there may be snakes also in the area, particularly if once more you know that there might be mice around, as there has been in more recent times. If you're near a water body, whether it's a dam or the Onkaparinga River or any other water sources in the Mount Lofty Ranges where red-bellied blacks might be found, or along the Onkaparinga River where there are tiger snakes, just be very careful when you're leading a horse or allowing it to move in those areas, because that's when they might surprise a snake and come into contact with it. One of the things that, or two in fact, that come out of the scientific studies of snakes in New South Wales was that the time when snakes were most active and most of an issue were on cool spring days. Now, does that, or could that also relate to horses in this part of Australia too? I don't know, but it's something to think about. Similarly, the scientists found that in vegetated areas where there are tussock grasses, on days when they were rather cool and cloudy and windy, that was also more hazardous. We talked about the cool effects of temperature before and how cloudy can affect contrast. Windy is similar in that if it was a still day and you or a horse were moving through that area, a snake is more likely to see you because you are moving. But if it's a windy day and all of the vegetation, grass or shrubbery is moving, then perhaps the snake would be less likely to see you. So the scientists found that this did relate to humans. Can it also relate to horses? I don't know, but it's something that you might want to think about. So some quite specific photographs which do relate to people on horse properties, and looking at some of the issues. I won't identify where these are. The first one shows two areas with a horse on the right, but in between those is an amount of plants, weeds and so on. If that is allowed to grow too thick, then if snakes can get into this area, then they are now in close vicinity to a horse. And similarly with this photograph, much more vegetation getting closer to an area where horses are worked. You really do need to do something about the agapanthus or the other shrubbery to either thin them out so that they're not so close to where the horses are moving or being led. A close-up of a ground situation. And what might not be quite so obvious with this one, yes, there is a veg on the ground, but there's also a pipe laying on the right hand side which could easily accommodate a snake, and it can move in there and come out the other side where you may not expect it. So anything at all where a snake can hide and the cover is close to the ground. And that includes this area where there's quite a bit more vegetation, and the snake could move from the right hand side of the photograph and closer into a building which is on the left. Another one which doesn't look like it's too much of an issue, but the problem here is that when there's a stable or a shed where you move on a daily basis and there's debris laying against the wall, as you can see in the photo, and some weeds near the doorway, it allows the snake to come in close, and now you've got it inside rather than just outside. The photograph here, if there's a snake inside that shed with the doors of the cupboard open, even though they've got perhaps just spray material in there, it may not be in itself an attractant for snakes, but if the snake is disturbed and it's trying to find somewhere to hide to get away from you or your horse, the only place is inside that cupboard with the door open. You don't expect it, and you just push the door closed, but when you open it again, you've got a surprise. Similar situation here to one of the previous photographs is that a snake can be in the succulent on the right hand side. It's quite extensive. It could be living in there perhaps and just making little sorties inside to knock off the mice that are in amongst the hay, and you need to be aware of that and take precautions rather than just lift a hay bale perhaps with your bare hands. Wear gloves so that if you do come to accidental contact, you'll be protected. Once again, just showing a grass growing quite thickly around the edges of this this area where horses are active. This photograph is another one which on the surface doesn't look like it could be a problem, but if you look at all of the drums there, you'll notice that one of them is the lid has a little bit up on the 44-gallon drum there, and if a snake is able to get up onto that bench on the right hand side and it's attracted to the smell of mice, there might even be a mouse inside that drum. Now you've got the snake in there trying to do you a service by removing your mice, but you may not expect it. So make sure that lids of feed drums, and there's one on the left as well, are close fitting and are kept closed when not in use. More debris there on the ground with the horse on the right hand side. Really any rubbish that's laying around should be either put off the ground, stacked vertically on top of a roof, or just removed completely. It's too much of a hazard. So just to go over reducing risks, make sure that you're wearing personal protective equipment, so protective clothing. Be careful around buildings that are not used very often, and be cautious of horses that might move in the same sort of area. If you have to move them close to a water body, then be mindful of the potential for black snakes to be present, not so much brown snakes. Understand that snakes are most active in the spring, not so much on a hot summer's day, but be very careful on cooler days when the snake might not perceive that you're there and it's slower to get out of your way. And one point about anti-bird netting, if you've heard about it and you're tempted to use it to try and trap a snake, leave it to a snake catcher to use that material, because if a snake is trapped in that, it's going to be very upset, and if a horse comes upon it, there's a better than even chance that it will get bitten, and that would also include you if you don't know what you're doing. So some of the photographs here that are better. Minimal vegetation here, so that's a better way to go. The doors in this stable area are reasonably close fitting, so snakes are unlikely to be able to get under them. Again, the veg is either growing up or it's been thinned out along the ground, so much better in that respect. Water point here, you might think that a snake can get under the area below the water point, but if it can hide and it's close to the ground, yes, it can be an issue, but when there's about 100 mils or 4 inches under the pallet there, they're less likely to go under there and stay in that vicinity. They may get under there but not want to hang around. Once again, areas being cleaned up, much better than some of the previous photographs. Also here you see that pretty well all of the drums have got close-fitting lids. The only issue with that might be mice in the hay on the left, which could attract snakes to that, but at least here there's minimal areas for snakes to hide or want to hang around. This one's been mentioned before in regard to when you have to move hay, make sure that you protect your arms as well as your legs, because brown snakes certainly can climb, particularly in a haystack when they're going after mice, so be very mindful of that. And this one shows bird netting being used, and as I said before, if you are tempted to use this material to trap a snake, then make sure you know of a snake catcher that can actually remove the snake when it's caught, rather than you try and do it yourself. So the last session here, just a little bit about snake bite in horses. This information is from a number of different sources and from veterinary references, some of which are reasonably able to be accessed. The points that I'm trying to point out here are that be careful of any changed behaviour in your horse, because be mindful also that not all snake bites, as in humans, will result in this case, a horse being affected by the venom, but each time a snake bite is unique because of the differences, and the outcome of a snake being bitten depends on a number of different areas, such as the type of snake, it's got the composition of the venom, how much is injected, how readily it is absorbed into the animal, in this case a horse, and if a horse is bitten, then the preference is to use a specific or monovalent antivenom if at all possible, and that is administered by a vet. Can't be administered by a layperson normally. One of the issues we have in the Mount Lofty ranges where there are tiger snakes is that horses are highly susceptible to tiger snake venom, and of a number of domestic animals that were tested, then they had the greatest likelihood of being affected. So the lowest lethal dose, the smallest amount of venom was enough to affect a horse compared to others, such as dogs or cats. And one of the other points is that even though horses can be quite a large animal, the anti-venom dose relates to how much venom has been injected, not to the size of the animal was bitten, in this case a horse. So it's quite false that a horse might need a large amount of antivenom. This information is from a veterinary reference in 1970, and it just points out that of the domestic animals that were noted to be bitten by snakes, browns, tigers and black snakes, horses accounted for a very small percentage, and that's probably good news for people who are worried about their horse being bitten by a snake. So of, for instance, 1,250 brown snake bites, only 1.3% were horses that were bitten by them, with slightly higher percentages of tiger snakes and black snakes. This survey in 1993 by Peter Merchant and others from Australian Veterinary Association members, again, of the the large number of responses, horses mounted for a small number of them, as you can see there. But the point is that brown snakes, as in people, are the snakes in Australia that cause the most bites. And again, without going through all of these, because I'm not a vet, I'm giving you this information from the available references once more, which are listed on the left of the slide. Some of what's been noted in horses that have been bitten by snakes before, you can see there, ranging from restlessness, muscle twitching, breathing difficulties, dilated pupils, down to potentially, if you either saw the horse get bitten by a snake or can see around its head any fang punches. But as you've noted from before, with brown snakes having very small fangs, the chances of you finding fang punches are very remote. And just looking at three species that have caused issues with snakebite in horses, I'm not going to go through all of these in detail, but some that have symptoms have been noted from brown snake bite include bleeding from the nostril, difficulty breathing, and that's due to the neurotoxins in the brown snake venom, as is the general weakness or paralysis of the tongue and so on. But because of the neurotoxins in brown snake venom, they're incredibly potent. Paralysis can occur within 6 hours, and a horse may not survive from the bite, and that can be up to 6 days after the event. Black snakes, that's the red-bellied black in particular, they have been noted with not so many snake bites, very little is known about them, and fortunately a horse is unlikely to be fatally bitten by a red-bellied black snake. Different story with tiger snakes, touched on that before. The photograph here is of a Adelaide Hills tiger snake, so they look quite different from the ones from Kangaroo Island or the southeast or along the River Murray, black with fine yellow bands on the front part of the body. But as you can see from the listing of symptoms from a bite, somewhat similar to a brown snake because of the neurotoxins in the venom, and unfortunately tiger snakes, the venom is more likely to result in the horse not being able to survive. Information from Merchant's survey of vets is shown here, where after anti-venom treatment, the percentage of horses that have survived from brown tiger and black snake, and also from those that didn't receive anti-venom treatment. The last slide here is just some information to give you an idea of what you might do for first aid with a horse, and in essence it's the same as it is with other domestic animals, so dog or cat, and in fact with humans. And the main part of this is to ensure that the horse is no longer in danger, as it would be if it was a human. Don't try to catch or kill the snake. There's little value perhaps in trying to photograph it to give it to the vet, because in this part of Australia there's only a couple of monovalent antivenoms that would be suitable anyway. If you're not sure if the horse has been bitten, then follow it as if it has been. If you see where the horse was bitten, perhaps on the face somewhere, the muzzle, then don't do anything with it, don't wash it or touch it, because when a vet comes to you or the horse goes to a vet, they can swab the bite site in exactly the same way as with a human, and then run it through a snake venom detection kit to allow the vet to determine what anti-venom you might need. And in this part of Australia it would be either brown snake or tiger snake anti-venom. As much as possible, keep the horse quiet with minimal movement, so that as with humans, the venom tends to track via the lymphatic system to the best of our knowledge, and by keeping it quiet and minimal movement, there's minimal muscle movement, which is how the venom tracks via the lymphatics and into the circulation. You do need to seek veterinary advice as soon as possible, and if the vet can't come to you, then get the horse to the vet if possible within a couple of hours.